You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Tom Spender. China's rapid rise has also seen it play an increasing role in Africa, where it is building infrastructure and gathering raw materials. But is this a good deal for Africa? I recently travelled to Kenya to try to find out. The sound of traffic on the Thika road in Kenya's capital, Nairobi. In a city that endures endless traffic jams along dusty, potholed lanes, this modern 8-lane highway is the exception. Widely regarded as the best road in Kenya, even in East Africa, it was built by the Chinese firms Wuyi, Sino-Hydro and Shengli Engineering, and is the most visible sign of Chinese activity in the country.
I used to wake up early so that I could get early to work, but nowadays I just wake up normally and get to work at the right time, on time.
Andrew is a young Kenyan who says the new road cuts his commuting time by 2 hours a day, enabling him to get more done.
For 2 hours I do online marketing in the house. I sell some things online, and then I get to meet my clients online.
Andrew is a good example of what China says it is trying to achieve through its increasing activity in Africa.
C'est le principe de gagnant-gagnant, comme vous avez entendu souvent.
It's the win-win principle. China also wants to gain something, but it also wants to make the Africans gain something too. It's not just about giving some money. Instead, we should develop together. That's the current thinking.
Zhou Xiaoping is the Chinese government news agency Xinhua's deputy Africa editor. He says modern Chinese engagement in Africa began under Communist Party chairman Mao Zedong, who used aid to persuade African countries to switch diplomatic recognition from the Republic of China, today's Taiwan, where Chinese nationalists fled after defeat in China's civil war, to the People's Republic of China, where Mao's communists had emerged victorious. Today, China is an increasingly wealthy developing country, looking for raw materials to supply its growing economy and for new markets for its companies. In Kenya, Chinese firms are building roads and apartment buildings and have won a tender to make the first berths at a proposed new Indian Ocean port. Across the continent, Chinese firms are operating copper mines in Zambia and cobalt mines in the Democratic Republic of Congo. In Ethiopia, they are building a 5,000-kilometer rail network that will link the capital, Addis Ababa, to the port of Djibouti. Since 2002, China has invested an estimated $75 billion in Africa, not far behind the United States, which invested $90 billion. And in 2009, China replaced the US as Africa's biggest trading partner. But China's rapid emergence as a competitive player in Africa has caused alarm in some quarters. Earlier this year, the governor of Nigeria's central bank, Lamido Sanusi, wrote, "China takes from us primary goods and sells us manufactured ones. This was also the essence of colonialism." And speaking in South Africa in June, Barack Obama also took a thinly veiled swipe at China.
When we look at what other countries are doing in Africa, our only advice is make sure it's a good deal for Africa. If somebody says they want to come build something here, are they hiring African workers? Somebody says that they want to help you develop your natural resources, how much of the money is staying in Africa? If they say that they're very interested in a certain industry, is the manufacturing and value added done in Africa?
Nevertheless, Obama's trip was widely interpreted in the US as reflecting a new reality, that China's presence means the West is going to have to work harder to compete in Africa.
When you look at the transcript of what he says and you read it in black and white, then again it's condescending, as if Africa couldn't make choices and has got to be warned to be careful of the big bad Chinese. But in fact, in African policy circles, there's just great delight that finally governments get to make choices. It doesn't have to be just America, it doesn't have to be just Britain, and it doesn't have to be just China. Finally, you get a chance to play one suitor off against another. So there would have been much, let us say, scratching of heads and raising of eyebrows when the African ministers and prime ministers and presidents read the transcript of these brilliant speeches, and they would have been thinking, who does this man think he is?
Professor Stephen Chan is Chair of International Relations at the School of Oriental and African Studies. The son of refugees from China, he grew up in New Zealand, worked in Africa as a civil servant for the Commonwealth Office, and in 2010 was awarded an OBE for services to Africa. In a book he edited, published in May and entitled The Morality of China in Africa, Chan argues there is a moral basis to China's burgeoning role, despite the dominant narrative in the West accusing it of despoiling the environment and propping up dictators.
And of course, what lies behind Western concern is a very great deal of angst about future resources, who's going to be there to claim those resources, who's going to build up the best economic and trading relationships. But a lot of Western discourse is cloaked in the rhetoric of democratic values, etc., saying that the Chinese don't really care for any of these values, but that Western values are basically ethical ones, they're basically moral ones. So what I wanted to do was to introduce into the debate the idea that the Chinese do have a moral perspective as well. Now, I don't want to say that that's all they have, because that's patently untrue. They do want to have access to all kinds of resources. They do want to build their own economic structure, and at the same time, hopefully, some of this will be two-way and they'll benefit the African economic structures. I think that there's all kinds of things to play for in terms of high finance, but also perhaps in terms of future strategic leverage. There's a growing Chinese navy, for instance, and it's patrolling the waters of Somalia already. So the Chinese have got all kinds of future interests, but they do have some kind of moral ethos which prevents them from going too far in some of the economic exploitations. They are obliged, when entering into friendships with countries whom they would regard as younger brother countries, to behave like an older brother. And that is with a certain Confucian ethos of responsibility for those who are younger, but who are still members of the same family.
Furthermore, Chan contends that China is more sensitive than the West to Africans' aspirations.
The Chinese are prepared to build entire universities along the line of rail, along the line of road. We have this very limited ethos in Western development assistance that, education is important, let's build these guys some primary schools, as if that's all they needed, some basic literacy. The Chinese, because they came out of deprivation themselves just very, very recently, and a very great deal of the countryside is still within deprivation. The Chinese understand something which you don't have to knock too hard to find in Africa, and that is the power of aspiration. Actually, you don't want your kids just to stop at primary school. You want them to go on to secondary school. You want them to go on to university. This is a natural desire, and it's an aspiration for a future which is better, and an aspiration for a future which is educated. And I think the Chinese have cottoned on to that very, very well indeed. So they're prepared to go the whole hog and not put a glass ceiling, as it were. You can come up so far and you can't come up any further. So in some ways, it's naked, as it were, buying goodwill. No doubt about that. It can be as Confucian as it gets, but it's still naked buying of goodwill. But it's the naked buying of goodwill that has been very well thought out.
But the problem is he went to the Far East. Is it Far East or Far West?
Do you think could have done this work? The British? No.
Among Kenyans too, the question of China produces mixed feelings. In a nearby traffic police station, some employees say the thicker road won't last, while others ask why it took so long for anyone to build a highway there in the first place.
Those guys have stayed with Britain for the last, since independence. They never come to us with such a problem.
Aside from infrastructure projects, the main visible impact of China to Kenyans is the spread of cheap made-in-China goods, sometimes of questionable quality, and an influx of Chinese people themselves who come to work on big projects or set up businesses. Kenya has a relatively small population of Chinese, with an estimated 10,000 living in Nairobi, but about 1 million Chinese are thought to be in Africa, with the largest groupings in South Africa, Egypt and Nigeria. Nevertheless, many Kenyans fear Chinese companies will put local firms out of business and Chinese people will take local jobs.
I think it's unfair because if they come to Kenya and they start competing with small traders, that's unfair because they can get the goods cheaper from China and then they compete with local traders. I think if they came and did bulk business, like wholesale business, selling to the traders at a good rate, that's okay. But it's wrong for them to come and do the work that Kenyans can do. At the moment, you have about 60% of the population under 35. The majority are unemployed or in the informal sector. And the same informal sector is where the Chinese want to come and work. It can't be done.
Boniface Mwangi is a photojournalist and activist who founded the organisation Power 254, which describes itself as a social enterprise encouraging creative people to carry out work that has social impact. Mwangi's graffiti, portraying politicians as rapacious vultures, dots Nairobi's bustling central business district. And Mwangi is similarly dubious about China's win-win intentions for Africa.
It's a win-lose situation because they don't care about human rights, they don't care about fair trade, they bribe a lot, there's a lot of corruption when it comes to involving Chinese companies. So it's not a win-win, it's a win-lose because they stand to benefit more than we stand to benefit.
However, China's stated policy of non-intervention in the internal affairs of other countries has proved popular among Kenyans, many of whom say they are fed up of being told what to do by Western governments. In the run-up to the Kenyan general election in March, Western countries advised Kenyans not to vote for the eventual winner, Uhuru Kenyatta, because he had been indicted by the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity relating to post-election violence in 2008.
I think the turning point or the tipping point was when I think Ambassador Carson came and said, choices have consequences. And, the British followed, the whole of European followed. And it actually boomeranged on them because people felt like insulted. They were like, you cannot just come and tell us what to do. And that was the game changer, in my opinion. Because that's when people said, now we're actually going to vote for this guy.
John Gashiri is a Kenyan newspaper commentator.
The Chinese are nothing. They were like, subtle diplomacy, they were like, it's the will of the people. We'll sit back and play. In fact, I don't think they ever made any comments. Or rather, something that you can actually even remember. Yeah, they were more or less like, it's none of our business. We're going to let it play out. And who comes into office, we'll work with them. Yeah.
For Gashiri, this approach gives China the upper hand in countries such as Sudan or Zimbabwe, whose leaders are accused by Western governments of abuses.
Yes, for example, Ethiopia, I know they are doing very many infrastructure projects there, the Congo. In those countries, I would say they are having a big impact because, see, if you have for lack of a better word, a dictatorship, of course, the US or European countries, they are not going to give, there is so much they can do because, their taxpayers cannot allow their money to go into regimes that are accused of this, that. But China does not have that sort of policy. Theirs is, we don't interfere in your politics. So in those countries, definitely, they're going to have the upper hand.
China's response is that democracy does not necessarily bring with it development. Xinhua's Zhou Xiaoping again.
La Chine a été critiquée par les pays occidentaux sur les droits de l'homme.
China has been criticized by Western countries over human rights because they insist on the right to free speech and assembly, while China and other developing countries say the right to food and life is more important. Many African countries have adopted Western democracy. Why don't they have a development level like European countries? Many countries have elections every 4 years, but they develop slowly and even experience conflict. China is different. Why does China have such strong economic growth? It's a question worth studying. I don't think Western democracy is necessarily destined to save the whole world. In China, we say cross the river by feeling the stones. We search to find the best way to improve living standards and maintain stability.
Kenyan writer and satirist Binyavanga Wainaina is the author of the memoir One Day I Will Write About This Place. I meet him in a hotel bar in Westlands, an upscale area of Nairobi popular with Western expatriates, many of whom work in NGOs and development organizations. Wainaina is skeptical of Western attempts to encourage democracy in Africa.
Democracy is an important idea. Development is an even more important idea. People need dignity in their lives, where they're able to feed themselves, where they're able to fulfill their dreams. In the West's question of democracy, it seems to be what they call elections. Was the election free and fair? How was the election free and fair? Can you make Mali have an election in 2 weeks? Can a country that has imploded have an election in 2 weeks? How can anyone in the sane universe ever say there was ever a free election in Congo? But because the West wants a free election in Congo, a free election in Congo will be manufactured.
Even though they are both dubious about China's impact on human rights in Africa, both Boniface Mwangi of Power 254 and John Gashiri concede that Chinese projects in Africa are improving people's lives.
I think right now, when it comes to China, it's mutual trading, because you know what you're going to get from it. You know, Chinese doesn't care about governance and human rights, but you're going to get roads, you're going to get water projects, it's going to be done and delivered. They don't come and lecture you about what to do and what not to do, or structural adjustments like the World Bank. So it's business, and it's purely business. Whether it involves corruption or murder, it's still business. And I think that's a plus. Even if human rights is not an issue for the Chinese, at least there's a form of benefit that is trickling down to the common man. And that's a good thing.
However, Chinese companies are also accused of flouting a swathe of environmental norms in Africa. A Chinese oil firm is exploring in a Gabonese national park, angering environmentalists. In the informal sector, about 4,500 Chinese have left Ghana after a crackdown on illegal and heavily polluting gold mining there. Meanwhile, conservationists say African rhinos and elephants face extinction in the wild because of newly wealthy China's appetite for ivory obtained through poaching.
You know, there's definitely a sense of China's a friend in Kenya, and we don't really want to piss them off. Not just in Kenya, across Africa. There is a failure of African people and African governments to hold China to account.
Paula Kahumbu is executive director of the Kenya Land Conservation Trust.
The scale of ivory moving out of Africa is doubling every 1 or 2 years. That is how serious it is. Well, we all know that China is the #1 market for ivory. More than 80% of the ivory in China is illegal. And it's only China that is insisting that there is no connection between the legal domestic trade and the illegal trade. There's no question that elephants will go extinct. You know, some people are saying 15 years or 20 years. I think less than 10.
In China, celebrities such as the former NBA star Yao Ming and top actress Li Bingbing have launched awareness campaigns targeting the consumption of ivory and rhino horn. But observers say it will take time for habits to change. Meanwhile, Stephen Chan says Africa is on the cusp of industrializing, and that carries with it significant environmental risk.
A lot of Chinese mining activities could do a lot better, not only in terms of ecological preservation, but certainly in terms of human resource management. You know, like they could obey the laws of the country when it comes to labor relations and labor rates, for instance. So there's lots of shortcuts being taken by the Chinese among many other people who've gone out to, as it were, benefit economically in Africa. Now, having said that, what you've got in Africa is a huge rush to industrialize. Now, we could tut at that, say, what are these people doing? But they realize that unless they do that, they're going to be forever doomed to being the providers of raw materials and raw resources. They're always going to be at someone's beck and call. Whereas if you're able to take part in the chain of manufacture, then your, as it were, scope for negotiation, your scope for leverage in the international trade negotiations is just so much greater. Now, everyone understands that when you start the manufacturing chain, you're also entering an era where there's all kinds of environmental consequences.
Nevertheless, the Chinese government is making an effort to clean up its act. In February, it issued guidelines on good environmental and social practice for state-owned enterprises operating overseas.
It's going to take time for actuality to catch up with good intentions and to catch up with legislation. But I don't think it's a front. I do think there is some serious long-term, as it were, intent behind this. Not least because in China people are themselves pissed off with having to live in smog.
I came here, I think, 2004, April. It's a very important date for me and a very important month for me. After university, that was my dream, to come to Africa, to see the people here and also to see the animals. I came from a very cold city, in northwest part of China. So during the winter, it could come down to -20. So when I came to Kenya, the weather is uniform throughout the year. So I believe it's a good place.
Gao Wei is one of the roughly 1 million Chinese who have come to Africa to build a new life. They are among increasing numbers of Chinese who are choosing to experience life outside China.
For Africa country, maybe we say it's if you start the business, the requirement is still very low. So now you can here to easy to set up business. So I think that is advantage. And also the living environment is not bad because compare, the pollution of course in China is worse, and also the competition is high. If I was in China, maybe I was working for a company, but here I have my own company. So that is the difference. For young people, I always say they should come out to try, to see, at least to see the world, and then you make your decision and whether to go back to China or stay outside. But from the whole population, we can still, Africa still have a small portion of Chinese immigration, and the big immigration still in Western countries.
Gao says that although the Chinese economy is growing fast, Chinese companies are also affected by intense competition in the domestic market. With their ability to penetrate mature Western markets limited, in some cases because of the relatively poor reputation Chinese brands have for quality, price-conscious developing country markets represent an important opportunity. For example, you're unlikely to see a Chinese-made Cherry or Great Wall car in London, but in Kenya the police have placed an order for 760 Cherry Tiggo SUVs.
Right now in China, competition is very high. Those big companies in Africa, this is state-owned company. Right now, they get a very little profit from China. The competition is too high. The situation forced them to go out, and for them, the profit is also higher compared with Chinese domestic market.
Gao's firm, called China Information and Culture Communication, is a bridging company, helping Chinese invest in Kenya and helping Kenyans go to China to study. Some 27,000 African students attended university in China last year, including 12,000 on Chinese government scholarships. Gao says experiencing China at first hand transforms Africans' view of the country.
Before they go, the idea of China is not clear. So it's about, for young people, it's dreaming to go to a big city. And because maybe they cannot afford to go to Western, so they go to China. Education is cheaper, so to see the beautiful cities, and also maybe they heard about the trading in China, so they think it can be very good. So they went to China, and after 4 years, now that is the real touch of China. Now they eat Chinese food, they stay with Chinese, and also they buy made in China. Everything is Chinese. According to me, everybody speaks good Chinese now. They have so many Chinese friends, and also they believe it's an opportunity, potential company, the country, to stay, to live. Some of them, they work there, some of them they are back. But after come back, they still want to go back to China. So I think there's a changing of idea.
The Chinese mix, big projects, opportunities to study abroad, and the example set by its own rapid rise is having an impact on Africans' view of the world. Last month, a survey by the group Consumer Insight found China had nudged ahead of the US as the top source of inspiration for Kenyans. And Africa may be set to follow in China's footsteps. In the decade up to 2010, 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world were in Africa. They were Angola, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Chad, Mozambique and Rwanda. Stephen Chan says African countries are getting better at negotiating with China.
At first, lots of African negotiating teams didn't quite know how to handle the Chinese, but they've been learning. Curiously, countries like Angola have learned to negotiate much better in recent years. But this is England, we're little Englanders, we don't like the European Union, we certainly can't speak Portuguese, and so we don't understand what the Angolans have been doing, both in the Portuguese language but also in their newfound mastery of Chinese language. So it was always only a matter of time before the Africans learnt how to push back in the negotiating conditions. And they're starting to do that now. So there'll be a much more egalitarian, as it were, ethos in terms of the relationships between individual African countries and the Chinese. This is not going to all happen all at once. I think the Namibians, for instance, just south of Angola, have just been done over by the Chinese in terms of the platinum mining deal, for instance. So you've got good cases here and bad cases there. But 10 years' time, there'll be far greater equalization in terms of this desire to learn how to be more adept at negotiating with the Chinese. We'll see how successful the Chinese are, and we'll start begging the Africans to be nice to us. This could be fun to be an African in 10 years' time.
And in Nairobi, writer Binyavanga Wainaina says all this means the West must finally accept that Africa can make its own decisions.
I feel like the West is trying to have a conversation with Africa about China that is not saying what the West is prepared to newly put on the table. Africa is now the place where emerging markets are growing. Asia has its seasons, it's graduated. South America, different pits and pits are points of graduating to points of no return where they can determine their fate. We are not at the point where we are able to determine our fate, but we are an established emerging market. People get good returns on their money. In fact, people get better return on their money here than they get better return on their money anywhere else. To me, I want to be listening to an American ambassador telling me, I want to do business with you because I know nowhere else I can get better returns on my money. We are liking how we talk with China. They say, how much? And we say, this much, this benefits me, that doesn't benefit you. And then China doesn't say, you don't even know what benefits you or not because you're a child, and how would you even know what's good for you? Because I know what's good for you. We're done with that shit. We are in a multipolar world. The West has to actually get it.
That was me, Tom Spender, reporting on China's growing presence in Africa for the Voice of Russia.